Hello everybody, welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, bringing you a brand new review, and today I'm going to be reviewing one of the greatest series of all time, if not the greatest series of all time. This is of course Band of Brothers, which aired back in 2001 on HBO. And you might be wondering, why are we talking about Band of Brothers in 2024? What is it this year that could possibly lead to something like this? Well, Masters of the Air begins streaming on Friday the 26th of January at very long last. A series that's been in production for many years, and we thought, why not go back to where it all began? Of course, Saving Private Ryan came out back in the late 90s. We covered that in the Spielberg retrospective, and the offspring of that, Spielberg, Tom Hanks and many others came together to create not just Band of Brothers, but also The Pacific, and there is involvement still with Masters of the Air, which is going to be streaming on Apple. So now is the best time, more than any, to revisit the greatest series of all time. I'm just going to say it. Maybe it's the closing remarks for the whole review, who knows, but I'm going to try my best to talk about this because there's a few other little things I want to talk about. First and foremost, I want to know your thoughts on Band of Brothers. If you remember watching it when it was live, or if you watched it as the years went by, how it compares to some of the other of the World War II series and other modern shows, and also maybe your thoughts on the way in which miniseries are going, because I'm going to be maybe talking about this modern concept that a miniseries is a 6-hour film, which it really isn't when you look at something like this. So I'm going to try my best to do this. I'm flying solo today, and I might at the end also talk about maybe another opportunity to discuss Band of Brothers in a little bit more detail. But as always, I'm going to kickstart with the IMDb plot synopsis, and this one is quite simple. The story of Easy Company of the US Army, 101st Airborne Division, and their mission in World War II Europe from Operation Overlord to VJ Day. Now, that's an understatement, putting it lightly. This is 10 episodes, 10 of the finest episodes of TV you're ever going to get the opportunity to witness. I'm going to be trying my best to talk about the series as a whole. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the cast. I'm going to talk about what maybe cast members that have gone on to do other things too. Because if I give my approach to this, I've already flown through its praises. This is one of my favourite ever shows, arguably my favourite ever show. It's really tricky with miniseries when you compare them to like long length stuff. It's really tricky. But ever since I saw this at I want to say a fairly young age, I might have been 12, 13, I was definitely at school when I watched it. I was blown away. I hadn't seen anything like this, and the times I've seen it since then, not only has it aged phenomenally, it's almost this time capsule now that you go back to the early noughties and this is what this actor's in, and now we will recognise this person who was in one scene there, and it's a really interesting perspective to visit it 20 plus years later. And I'm going to put the biggest disclaimer in I can. I have not read the book that this was adapted from. I know, of course, that it was published in the early 90s, and one of the reasons I've never read it is because not only do I not own it, but I am trying to get through Masters of the Air. I have picked up that book in the meantime, but also when I started rewatching the series, it became abundantly clear to me very quickly, a short review isn't going to do this justice. A long review isn't going to do this series justice. If I bring another person on, I have a couple of us on, can we really do it all? So the question I'm posing now, and don't hold me to it, I am wondering if after Masters of the Air has been and gone, dependent on our summer schedule, it is the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landing this year. I am wondering whether to do Band of Brothers as a weekly discussion to go through all 10 episodes later in the year. I am undecided on that at the moment. There's a lot of things I need to plan with that with respect to guests, other people, do some more research. So I do want to hear from people. Comment your thoughts if you'd like to see that. It'd be very different because it's not running live. But if you're watching an episode a week, then you can do it because, as I said, no video is going to do this series justice. It's got to be done episode by episode by episode. And kind of one of the reasons I'm sort of going back to this shorter review is the fact Masters of the Air is coming out. And once again, I'm going to be looking at this as a miniseries, but at the time of production, this was the most expensive miniseries ever made. And for maybe people based here in the UK, this will sound wild in this day and age. A HBO series airing on BBC. It aired on BBC Two. And my understanding is that the BBC paid $10 million to actually co-fund it. $10 million out of $120 million budget really is not that much, is it? But that was the most expensive BBC production they'd ever done. And the fact that the Prime Minister at the time was involved in the negotiations to ensure this went ahead, it shows that this wasn't just a bog standard series being made, it was prestigious from the get-go. And when I go back to looking at Band of Brothers, and I mentioned the evolution as time's gone on, I sort of look at this as one of the 3 shows that changed the TV landscape. Now, film, I would say, is my specialty, not TV. But what I do want to hear from people, because everyone pinpoints HBO as the channel that led to the golden age of TV, which we're supposedly living in now. And I've always appreciated people have different shows. But in my perspective, I'm looking at Band of Brothers, Sopranos, and The Wire. I think without those three shows, the prestige TV, which would go on to become a mega thing of the last 10, 15 years, I don't think would be the same. Now, then you've got to think about none of those were on streaming services, whereas Breaking Bad was one of the big ones responsible for the streaming age of Netflix essentially saving it back when it first began. So it's one of those where it's a really tricky one, but I look at Band of Brothers in that prestigious slot, and irrespective of production values, budgets are spoken about far too much these days. This is a series in which you see that entire budget on screen. In fact, it still looks today better than 90% of TV shows that come out today. Now, I haven't watched The Pacific since it first aired. I'm excited for my rewatch next week. I'm going to be, of course, doing a short review on that too. But with Band of Brothers, you can just look at the attention to detail from the production, from the people that were involved from the get-go. Tom Hanks is one of the key collaborative figures in this series. He does direct episode 5, actually, which is, I can't say one of the best episodes. I don't think there's a bad episode. I think they're all incredible. Each and every one differs from the last, so it's really tricky. And I was looking at, do I talk about it episode by episode? And again, it's led to me thinking, is this a long-term thing to do in the summer? Which the more I talk about, the more I'm leaning towards thinking that and having some conversations. But something that really caught my eyes, and what I've known from the get-go, obviously the episodes open with the real life characters, well, the real life people that the series is, of course, telling the story of, nameless until the final episode, which I've always loved, because it leaves you that, who is this person, you get that great sort of revelation at the end, who was who all along. But it's something which, historical accuracy is a really interesting thing. We're living in, again, a different time now, where we're seeing more and more issues online with certain recasts, certain people being cast for roles. I recently criticised Adam Driver playing Ferrari. I'm laughing now because I've just realised that, well, I didn't realise, but most of this cast is British and they're playing the American soldiers. But it's one of those where there was a historical authenticity from the get-go with the series, from the book adaptation through to the scripts. What would happen is the actors were in talks, they're in communication with the soldiers that were still alive. And if that soldier said X and Y wasn't actually in that scene or in that bit, they would be pulled out of the episode. And it tried to be as authentically accurate as it could be. And that's something that I absolutely adore with stuff like this. And this is where I've said it so many times on this channel. Obviously, I loved history at school growing up. We covered the 20th century as a key figure. So I think when I was watching this again when I was younger, you have that, I guess, immature experience of, oh, look, action, guns, playing Call of Duty 5, stuff like that. But as an adult, you can't come to appreciate not only the production and what the series is, but what the real life people went through. This is trying to be as historically accurate as it can. And there are a couple of errors. Blythe is the most well-known one, that he didn't pass away in 1948, he passed away in 1967. But nobody knew that until in the years that followed, which is always, I found, fascinating. And they've not gone back and redacted it on edits and stuff like that. But the approach from a production standpoint, you just cannot fault. I know that Tom Hanks, as I said, was involved in that. Then it would go to Steven Spielberg. He'd look at it from a directing perspective. And then it would, of course, go to the other people. And I think that's something you need with shows like this. It's also a lot trickier now. And this is, I guess, one of the things with something being 20 plus years later. The last soldier from Easy Company passed away last year in real life. Sorry, 2022 now, I've got to say. And that's where this sits in this time capsule, that you forget that, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of the World War II veterans were still alive. Now, there are, I believe, around 120,000 US ones alive today. But you've got to think that number comes down each year. I remember growing up and the last World War I veteran had passed away. It was this massive ordeal on the news. And it's this weird point in history when we can look at this series with most, fair amount of them still alive, that were alive after the war ended, talking to the series, reuniting for the show. And then you're in that situation nowadays where we're not going to get that with something like Masters of the Air, which is completely understandable, and that is what happens with history. And again, it's just a massive credit to the production on this series, that they wanted to include them. It wasn't just we consulted them, we spoke with them. They wanted them on camera, so we're hearing about them. And I think it's one of my favourite things is having them speak before each episode, that you're almost getting teased about what this episode is going to be covering. You can put a couple of things here and there together, but until the title rolls and the episode begins, you don't know specifically who or what they were talking about. And I think it's a really powerful storytelling mechanism that very few shows have done in a way since like this, because it's not a documentary, is it? It's a drama series. I don't want to call it an action series, it's a war series. And kind of sticking with the story with this, moving on from the veterans, I want to talk about the concept of miniseries too, because the term miniseries I mentioned, I think it's overused a lot today. A lot of shows, certainly I'd blame CEOs such as Bob Chapek for this, where there's a film concept and they said, no, it's not a film, it's now a streaming thing for Disney Plus. Now make it 6 hours, make it 6 episodes. And that's been a problem. And I think what that has done, irrespective of me enjoying a lot of those shows, is the actual real miniseries that were designed to be, certainly in the UK, would always have a 6-episode miniseries on BBC. We've just had the Post Office one on ITV, which is meant to be incredible. I've not watched it yet. But also, if it's a miniseries, you should be asking the question, why is it a miniseries? What's stopping this from being multiple seasons? What is maybe stopping this from being a film? You have to look at the production. That's what the writers are organising. And for something like Band of Brothers, we're telling the story of Easy Company. We're going to begin with their training in 1942. We're going to go up to the end of the Second World War, and then almost an epilogue on what happened to them while afterwards. That doesn't warrant a 3-4... Well, maybe it does warrant a 3-4 season show, but the conscious decision to make this a 10-episode miniseries to cover their story from start through to end of them coming together to their farewells, giving individual episodes to certain people within that company, some maybe not expected more than others. Of course, we've got Richard Winters in the lead, Damon Lewis, who is, I would argue, the main character of the entire series. But there are almost episodes where it's not centered on him, it's centered on others, and I really enjoy that aspect, and I think it's something that's held up really well. And what the show is doing, it's reminding people what a mini-series should aspire to be. That if you've got a story to tell, you can tell it in short form. It doesn't need to be a film or multiple films. I'm going to mention Ferrari again, completely irrelevant, but you can't condense Enzo Ferrari's life down to a race in 1957 in a 2-hour film. It should be something such as this, where if you need to explore different parts of the story, then this opens the doors. And I think, again, by focusing this on Easy Company, the fact it's not the D-Day landings we've seen in Saving Private Ryan, we're getting the paratroopers coming in. And that's something I've enjoyed with the Pacific. That's something I'm looking forward to Masters of the Air. We've got different stories within World War II. We're not hearing that or seeing the same thing over and over again, because there are so many stories that will never be known. It isn't in sense to adapt it to the big screen, or books that may have rights purchased that nothing's happened with it. So anytime you get the chance to explore something in a mini-series, as expensive as the series is too, it is just something to behold. And again, what this has done, irrespective of production design, the authenticity of costumes, where I believe that almost all the costumes for like civilians in the town, certainly in Holland and stuff like that, were the real life costumes that they have. They were vintage clothing from the 40s that they were putting on the actors. And you look at that approach, and that's really what it should be, right? And I don't want to criticise the modern industry because it's unfair in this video, but people talk about Lord of the Rings in this mindset, and I've never watched the entirety of the behind the scenes on the extended editions, and people talk about it as the pinnacle of filmmaking, that there'll never be another trilogy like it, there'll be nothing. You look at how they made it, how they wanted to do it, and that's how I feel with Band of Brothers. And it's one of the first times where I really do get it with people, even from the production standpoint of this, where putting veterans in the premiere in Normandy so they could watch it, they were all flown out to watch it together. Little things like that make a difference. And then when you have the authenticity of this was our approach, we're not shoehorning in, let's switch this around, let's switch that. The fact that the cast members were in a position where they could potentially go to producer, go to and say, hey, this didn't happen, so it's not going to happen. That just wouldn't happen in today's day and age. And we don't know a lot about the behind the scenes of Masters of the Air at the moment. It's something we're going to be very excited about in the next months. Hopefully the show delivers what I'd like, but with a series such as this, it is just impeccable, and it's hard not to love it. And kind of where I'm going with this, as you can tell, I'm not really speaking about the episodes. I think as I've progressed this review, it's clear I need to do a proper series review with people week by week by week. But I want to talk about a couple of characters. I mentioned Richard Winters, played by Damon Lewis. Again, you can't fault any of the performances from the cast in this. I don't know the real life counterparts. As I mentioned, I haven't read the book, but to me, I look at Damon Lindelof and this is like his role. Winters is the role I always associate him to. I know he's done so much since this, but you look at, again, somebody's career, and it's really fascinating Band of Brothers that you can almost pinpoint some of them and pull it back to this. And the cast list is endless. I don't have them all printed out. I would never be able to do them justice, but I've got a couple of names I really want to talk about. People that I think have maybe some of the most impact on the show. No doubt I'm going to be missing others, so please do comment if you do think I have missed them. But Ron Livingston, I absolutely love as Nixon. I can still never get over the fact that I never know if it's Ron Livingston in a role or if it's Kyle Chandler. They are almost alike, and I saw Office Space for the first time last year, but playing the role of Nixon where we finally get a bit of perspective of this is someone who is on the war front, who is out here in Europe, and we're finding about their home problems back with his wife through a divorce and stuff like that. And people might think it's far-fetched drama, but this is reality. This happened, and this is what did happen in the wars. Also, alongside that, we get to see his, maybe not deterioration, but as they go through differing things week to week, across the months, across the years, it's really interesting to see how some of them evolve as characters or their personas, and I think Ron Livingston's incredible in this series. Also, Lipton, played by Daniel Warbeck. I always enjoyed him in this series. I don't know what it is. He's one of the more respectable folk, and I believe there was a big issue on one of the episodes where he was instructed to do something in a way, and he knew that isn't what happened in real life, so that he didn't do it, he vetoed it. I think that might have been on Crossroads when they cross the river. But again, it's one of those performances where you look at them, you're watching them across a 10-episode series, and some might be more memorable, they might have appeared in more episodes, or they might have a more interesting character or path within this, and I think Donnie Wahlberg is sensational. David Strum we have to talk about. You've got to think contextually 2001, Ross from Friends, he's in this drama series thing, and I can't imagine what it would have been like back then, but I remember watching it the first time, I was like, wait, that's Ross from Friends. He's playing an arsehole. He's not... Ross isn't the best of the six, but it's one of those where you look at it and think it's such inspired casting that contextually, again, for 2001, it's a massive change. Now, Captain Sobel, I have read stuff on him as the years went by. He actually had a pretty harrowing story post-World War II, but you look at how that squad was shaped, how their competency was, and you've got to think a lot of it does come to the discipline from a captain such as that. You see it more in sports and other things like that. But it's really interesting when you look at the series as a whole. You can take it all back to episode 1, and it's David Schwimmer's performance that almost sells the unit. If you didn't hate him, you're not going to like the others as much because you're not going to feel justified with their actions. So we've got to talk about Captain Sobel. And I've got a load of shout-outs here for something really interesting. So again, week by week, it's going to be much easier to do this, but I want to also point out Dexter Fletcher and Philip Barantini. They played Martin and Sisk in this. Now, both of them have gone on to have stellar careers and have moved into directing, which I find very fascinating. Philip Barantini, of course, did Boiling Point with Stephen Graham, who also appears on the episodes in this, and Dexter Fletcher is just a phenomenal director, and he's one that the leads in this series across the 10 episodes. But we also get so many of the younger audience, younger actors who would go on to be massive names. You've got Michael Fassbender, Tom Hardy, Stephen Graham, Simon Pegg, James McAvoy, Mark Warren. There will be so many others that I've missed or forgot. And that's the thing with a show such as this, that it's that time point that we're 20 plus years in the future, and we can see that this series launched the careers of so many others. Even the Pacific, I know, has a young Rami Malek in, and even looking forward to Master of the Air, we've got Barry Keoghan in there alongside Austin Butler, who have both gone on to do big stuff since filming it. Since they began on that series, they've already hit the limelight. So it's really interesting that these series also hold up in a time capsule, and that's the stuff I like, is seeing some of these younger actors who would go on to do so many great things. Some of them are in it for a scene, some of them are in it for an episode, some of them are in it for 9 episodes, and it's a really interesting experience, and I'd love to hear more about their experiences on this series, especially at young ages, like being a young actor coming through the ranks and ending up on a series as prestigious as this. It was so young. I think it's Tom Hardy's actual first credit, so again, there's a lot you can read into with that. But what I've got to say, the cast, without just going through names and one by one, the series is called Band of Brothers. It's about the company, it's about the people. If you don't elevate towards them, it's not just about the action or the war or going through things, it's your experience following these people across the World War II. And I think that is what really sells it, that if you didn't like the cast, if there are certain people you don't like, if you don't think the chemistry between them is real, if you don't think you can believe some of the action or what they've been through, the series won't function. But it does, because every single person is just cast to perfection. You cannot fault a performance in this, if I'm being really honest with you. So I missed out, no doubt, many names, but you'll have a character you spend a lot of time with that you enjoy, and then when that character is no longer on the show, it feels like there's been a gap, or if somebody is not necessarily killed off, but if somebody has been killed, like in the real life stuff, then you don't get them moving forward, and it leaves you in that shock and awe. So it's something that the series can't function without the cast, and the cast is absolutely one of the reasons this show has, I think, gone on to have the legacy it has, and that's kind of where I'm segueing with this next. When the series come out, I've got to talk about the iconography. This would go on to win Best Miniseries at the Emmys, Best Direction at the Emmys, Best Miniseries at the Golden Globes. Countless awards contextually for 2001-2002 time, and again we're discussing it 20 years later. It's had home video releases on DVD, on Blu-ray. It is a series that people speak of that's held in the highest of regards. I've never met somebody that's watched this and thought, this isn't me, or this is terrible. Nobody ever thinks that. It is single-handedly one of the greatest shows ever made. And listen, I've been going for 20-ish minutes on this. I don't normally do these on these shorter reviews. You can't condense a series such as this down to 20 minutes. And where that leaves me wanting to talk about it more in the future, I definitely want to do that. And I'm saying this without planning anything on this video. That's a conversation I'm going to probably be having. But also, alongside this, it's a series I think so many people have had different experiences with. It'd be far more interesting to get a varied perspective on it. So I'm going to sort of politely round out this video today. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of the series. You don't need my final words. I've called it the greatest series of all time. You're not going to hear me saying that 4 or 5 times a year about multiple shows, about different shows. This genuinely is, I think, the best series ever made. From production to the output, to the cast, to the story, to the people involved, to the real life sides, the horrors of war, all the sorts of stuff that you should get from a series such as this. It delivers with it. And what it delivers is ultimately, as I said, the best show ever made. And that's kind of how I'm rounding this review out. It's a weird one to do. It feels weird talking about this out loud, but that is my review for Band of Brothers. It's like a light review. It feels heavy, but that's definitely light because I haven't really been able to get into the episodes themselves. And as I said, maybe later on in this year, I will start planning some things in motion for that. But I mentioned the Pacific. I'm going to be dropping a review for the Pacific next Wednesday, so you'll get one of these each week. If we're lucky, we'll get some Masters of the Air stuff before it comes out. If we're not, we'll be trying to cover the series as well when we can. It's not going to be weekly spoiler discussions for Masters of the Air. Maybe it will be, something changes, who knows, but it's a show I'm very much looking forward to, and I'm curious to see what other people think. So, as I said at the beginning, please do comment your thoughts on Band of Brothers, on the Pacific, on Masters of the Air. Are you looking forward to them? Are you not? In the meantime, we'll see you on the next one. Take care.